The next set of videos are outtakes from the first half of a two-part workshop on the expanded role of stakeholders in the Gen 4 ERCs. Part 1 was held on May 18th, 2022 in a virtual format. This 4-hour workshop delved into whether a separate stakeholder working group is needed to facilitate the evolution of stakeholder engagement in Gen 4 ERCs. The first video from the workshop is Dr. Andrew Maynard's keynote. Dr. Maynard is a professor in the Arizona State University School for the Future of Innovation in Society and the director of the ASU Risk Innovation Lab. His presentation talks about why our innovation process needs to change to aid us in identifying potential disruptions earlier than we have thus far been doing. In the video, Maynard describes the Tom's Shoes case study, where there are both positive outcomes and negative unintended consequences of the firm's charitable deeds. Although Tom's Shoes learned an important lesson from this experience, for me, the key takeaway from Maynard's talk is an understanding that there is a problem to innovation, to solution, to consequence cycle, which I will refer to as the PISC cycle going forward. In the past, there was always a long gap between the implementation of an innovative fix and the manifestation of negative consequences from the solution. Eventually, those consequences become another problem that needs to be fixed, and the cycle starts again. But what happens when the time gap between the innovation and the realization of consequences shortens to the point that problems start piling up faster than one can innovate them away? With today's pace of innovation, this is exactly what we are beginning to see. It speaks to the urgency of managing the way that we introduce innovations if we want to avoid completely undermining the stable foundations of our society. The second video link is a panel discussion where each ERC from the class of 2020 presents their strategy for stakeholder engagement. A point of confusion in the discussions undertaken over the past 2 years has been our sloppy use of language around the word stakeholders. This slide classifies the motivational drivers for 3 different types of stakeholders that we identified and are working with. First, commercially motivated stakeholders. The ERCs have a rich history in interacting with stakeholders motivated by commercialization via their advisory boards. They also interact heavily with government agencies that help fund the R&D belonging to the first category of stakeholders. Second, economic development stakeholders. These are typically government entities focused on economic development by investing in workforce development, attracting established businesses into their regional sphere, and or spurring entrepreneurship from academic institutions in their regions. Third, community impact stakeholders. This is a broader set of stakeholders motivated by factors that, human factors especially, that impact the community, such as ethical implications, legal implications, expectations or demands from the user communities, or even pushback by those displaced by the technology. The ability to forge constructive working relationships with community impact groups are the least well-developed of the ERC stakeholder relationships. Therefore, the purpose of the working group, or the workshop rather, is to flesh out a systematic process for recognizing and engaging with the non-industry stakeholders that are most heavily impacted by an engineering research center's technology. To prevent confusion going forward, instead of calling it the mouthful of words, non-industry stakeholder working group, we will start speaking to the need of forming a community of practice working group. The working group charter that comes out of this workshop should focus on community impact. It should also define a way of defining a systemic process for the ERC culture to use in shifting from a pure focus on revenue generation to revenue generation that also requires a net positive outcome for the good of society. When we first started the stakeholder working group, we tried to categorize and list all the types of problems that ERCs would be called upon to address. But because we live in a complex world and the number of conceivable innovations is limited, it quickly became evident that this is not a practical approach. Instead, the emphasis is now on developing a process that can be applied to the generic PISC cycle. We also feel it's important to try to develop a means of measuring impact as part of the process definition, because the ability to measure the impact provides an early indicator of how rapidly an observed impact is growing. Clearly, if the impact is not growing or is shrinking, it is likely manageable within the standard PISC process. In summary, the objective of the workshop is to develop a charge for an ERC functional working group focused on community impact, to minimize confusion between the non-industry stakeholders and other stakeholder entities for which we have mature engagement protocols. In lieu of stakeholder working group, we will be referring to it as a community of practice working group going forward. Thank you.